So thank you, everybody. We're continuing our focus on ballot marking devices and their use in practicality, how they're actually used and how they're actually implemented around the country. And this is a very interesting talk and situation about the ballot marking devices that were developed and used for Los Angeles County for hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm introducing Ian Patton, who is the executive director of the Long Beach Reform Coalition, to discuss his organization's efforts to actually have the paper ballots that those ballot marking devices produce counted. So we heard so much yesterday about how important the paper ballot is, but it isn't always actually counted. So, or the voter verified part of it isn't always actually counted, the part the voter verifies. So thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, is this working? No, it was. Hello?
Check, check.
Hello? Hello?
Your voice, it's your voice.
Oh, now it's good, all of a sudden. Okay, here we go. All right, well, thank you, Susan. It's really exciting to be here at this event, especially because there are so many folks who have devoted so much of their careers and their technical expertise to the subject of voting systems and election security. And that's not me. I don't have the technical expertise. I've learned it the hard way through bitter experience. And that's really because I led a group and continue leading a group. It's really just a grassroots organization in Long Beach, California, which is the second largest city in LA County, which is devoted to government accountability and transparency. And we had a stake in a ballot measure which gave us the first experience of the new voting system in LA County, which is called VSAP, or Voting Solutions for All People. And so I'm just going to run through our experience on that as quickly as I can, and then hopefully have a little time left for some questions. Basically what happened is we had this ballot measure on the March 3rd, Super Tuesday, 2020 election. So you may remember that was the big presidential vote where you had Biden and Sanders and Buttigieg and everybody competing in a bunch of states, including California, and we were way down ballot, close to the bottom with local issues. And so we had this ballot measure that was just for Long Beach, and even that night, there were issues with VSAP in its first debut. This is a voting system that cost $300 million. It was designed by Smartmatic. It was a bespoke system designed specifically for LA County. LA County is the only county in the country that has this Smartmatic system. And in its first debut to the world, it was just kind of a meltdown. If you can remember back to then, there were headlines about these lines that were going on for hours. People were, it was getting close to 8 o'clock when polls closed, and there were still hours-long lines. And in California, if you're in line before the polls close, you're allowed to vote. So people were voting very late, but the Bernie Sanders campaign in particular was not happy and filed suit that night because there were a lot of people that just didn't get to vote. And so there were all kinds of issues with the e-poll book. There were issues with the interface itself. But we get through that, and that was not promising. But what we came to see later on was, in my mind, much more disturbing. So we had this local measure that we had taken the no side on, and on election night it showed the measure losing by a marginal amount, about 1% or so, and that was surprising to us because we had just put out a few hundred yard signs, and on the other side was sort of the establishment of the city that spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this passed. So we were very excited that the no side looked like it was winning. Well, there are 8 post-election updates to the count after this. The counting takes a long time with the new voting systems in California, as everybody is, I'm sure, aware by now. No difference with VSAP. So this is March 3rd, 2020, Election Day. we get 8 updates. In every single update, the no side is winning, except for the very last one on March 27th, where we have a certified result of the yes side winning by 1/100%. So 16 votes out of about 100,000 cast. And the reason I mention the post-election updates and the fact that we were winning on those is because this has to do with public perception, right? When people see something, oh, clearly one side is winning, one side is winning, one side is winning, you're going to have questions when, yeah, there we go. You're going to have questions when all of a sudden, on the very last count, when there are only 50 votes left to count in the city of Long Beach, all of a sudden the result is the yes side winning, which is the establishment side, winning by 16 votes out of 100,000. So of course we do the rational thing. In California, you have a right to request a recount. Anybody does. And we go right to our Los Angeles County Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk. That's the name of our county clerk, the office, and Dean Logan. And we say, okay, how do we ask for a recount? And they say, well, there's 2 ways. One way is that the registrar himself could say, you know, this is questionable and I'm just going to have a recount. And he is declining to do that. Maybe not a huge surprise, you know, because recounts can only be bad for the registrar. When the new voting system is his baby, he's invested a lot of his reputation into it. He doesn't want to see the result proved incorrect. So not a shock, but good news. We have the right to do a recount ourselves. So we say, okay, well, we want to do that. The catch is that you have to pay for it in California. That sounds a little daunting, but they send us a manual for doing recounts, which has these tables, and you're able to basically calculate the cost for doing a recount. The only problem is the manual they gave us was for the old system. And the old system, we estimated, would have cost to get through 100 ballots, $20, $30, maybe $40,000. And we raised $40,000 in just a matter of days, which was a big lift for us. I mean, we're a small grassroots organization, and there was just a lot of interest in the city of Long Beach in getting a recount. And our mailbox was full of, geez, $100, $200 checks coming in. People wanted this recount. And here we have a manual saying, okay, that'll work. And then the issues started rising. So the first issue was nobody's fault. You may recall that March 2020, something big was going on in the world. That was the beginning of the pandemic. So when the election happened on March 3rd, there were no cases of COVID in Long Beach. There were, I think, maybe less than a dozen in LA County. It was not the pandemic yet. It was just something that people were beginning to become concerned about. Within about 2 weeks after the election, it was the pandemic. And you had people scrambling to figure out social distancing and all these kinds of things. So the county's excuse was, hang on, we have to adjust things because of social distancing, and we've got some employees out and we've got to figure this out. It's like, okay, no problem. Well, that turned out to be a cover for the fact that they had given us the wrong manual. They had created a voting system over the course of a decade, costing hundreds of millions of dollars, and literally they had no plan for how to conduct a recount. None whatsoever. And this was like shocking to me because, I remember after the 2000 election when we started talking about new voting systems, and there was a lot of talk about, okay, it's going to be computerized, it's going to be fancy, but don't worry, because there's always going to be a paper trail. Well, what's the point of having a paper trail if you can't use it, right? So they have no policy, no procedure, no system to even sort out the ballots. So under the new voting system, you can vote anywhere. It's the vote center model. And you now have, instead of a precinct-based polling place where the ballots come back sort of pre-sorted by precinct, you have 2 million LA County ballots that are all mixed together. So you have to now extract physically 100,000 ballots from the 2 million. And they never stopped to think in this 10-year process. And this is the request for proposal that was put out sort of midway in this process, well, towards the end of the process, actually, when they were looking for the manufacturers that ultimately became Smartmatic. This is a over 50-page request for proposals. Nowhere does the word recount even exist. So they never even anticipated a piece of equipment that would be in the equipment cluster that would automatically sort out the ballots and make it possible to do the recount in the old way. Because in the old days, and the reason why it was less expensive, is the ballots were pre-sorted by precinct. They actually had a sorting machine for the vote by mail ballots that were these narrow strips. Actually, I can show you so this is our old-fashioned ballot, the Incavote. I call it a Scantron because it's like the high school Scantron that, if you're my age, you took tests on the high school Scantron. And that was our system. It was always hand-marked in the sense that either at the polling place, it was lined up for you, but you were hand-marking it with the ink, or at home, you were filling it in by hand. So they actually had a sorting system for the vote-by-mail ballots under the old Incavote system, but they didn't build that in to the new system, which was going to have way more ballots mixed together. And it's almost like they didn't want to have the possibility of doing a recount. I mean, I couldn't understand it, but it did kind of start sinking in when they finally got back to me the day before the recount was to begin legally, according to the election code. And they said, basically it looks like this is going to be calculated. They didn't give me an exact amount, but you can figure out that this is going to be over $200,000 if you want the actual physical hand ballots to recount, because they're going to make us pay for having 16 county workers spend 16 days as the initial part of the process to literally, like the Stone Ages, go through 2 million batch boxes of ballots and extract these 100,000 ballots before we can even start the portion of the normal recount function, which was all they used to charge for in the past. So that was our initial option. Basically $200,000, extract the ballots, do a recount. There's no way we could afford that. They gave us an option B, which was you can do a recount with scanned images of the ballots. Now, we were a little skeptical of that, but we didn't have any choice. It was a little unclear how much that would cost. It really depended on the speed and efficiency of the process. And so we said, okay, I guess we got to start with that. So we get up to the registrar recorder's office, and which is this huge building. It's like a fortress in Norwalk, California. And we get up to the registrar recorder's sort of suite of offices on the top floor, and they put us in the conference room, and they say, well, here are the rejected ballots. You have a right to go through these rejected ballots and inspect them. And you can do that while we're setting up the system to review the scanned images. They have no system. They have no interface. Our IT guys are on some other floor working on it right now. We're literally building the interface to figure out how to do this because we've put zero thought into it. And so that's what happens. And they took a day and a half to build the interface, which still ended up being just basically pulling up each PDF. Each ballot is its own PDF. And so finally, we can get started with this scanned images recount. And what we experience almost right away is it's a shit show. I was trying to think of a different word. There's just so many glitches with it. I would say the biggest issue was network lag, actually, because you have to have all these different screens. You have election workers that are reviewing the ballots, they're calling out the tally, you have talliers, and then you have to be able to have observers there too. And we had our people there observing. And so you've got these different screens that are all supposed to be displaying the exact same ballot at the exact same time. But because they were routing this through the internet, You had screens that literally one ballot would come up here, and this ballot would come up here 8 seconds later. So the process ground down and became so slow, and they had no sets of procedures. They didn't even understand the Secretary of State regulations, that there are some bare-bone regulations for doing recounts where you have to make sure you're all together every 10 votes or 25 votes and things like this. They had no manual, nothing. So it was just taking so long, and it was so slow that we realized it was still going to cost over $100,000. And after we got through about 10,000 ballots, we said, you know, we need to save the money we have to pivot to litigation, because this is ridiculous. But during that process of going through 10,000 ballots, we found that there was a problem. There was a consistent error in the way the machines were counting votes. Now, it was not a huge error, but it was 100% consistent, which is that for the hand-marked vote-by-mail ballots, you had the computer deciding that there were overvotes where there were no overvotes. In California, the standard is voter intent. And in every single one of these incidents, literally everybody in the room agreed on voter intent. You had, so this is the ballot mark device version of the VSAP ballot. These are always perfect because they're, you know, now whether the voter's intent gets translated to this ballot or not is a separate issue with ballot marking devices, of course. But the vote is encoded in the QR code, and of course, the computer's generating that, the computer's counting that, there are not going to be any discrepancies. But for the vote-by-mail ballot that's filled in by hand, there were many cases where you could see that the voter had perfectly filled in the circle for yes or for no for this ballot measure. And there was a dot or a jot or a tick just in the vicinity of the other circle, not necessarily even in the other circle. And the computer was saying, oh, they voted for yes and no, it's an overvote, throw it out. And everybody in the room said, that's ridiculous. The voter intent is clear. So that was a very consistent problem. And we were actually flipping votes and netting votes in our favor when we had to call this off. And also interestingly, you know, in California, we have this very antiquated automatic audit that happens after every election. It's the 1% hand tally audit. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to a lot of ballots because we have so many people voting by mail now, and this occurs right after the election. And a lot of those ballots are not received yet. But for the ballot mark device ballots and for those vote by mail ballots that are received, they do this 1% hand tally audit to make sure everything is kosher. And it's amazing how it always comes out perfect. And here we find a consistent error pattern. Why is that not showing up in the 1% audit? And the only thing I can speculate is that they're telling the county workers when they do the 1% audit to basically think like the computer when they're doing it. I can't prove that, but that's the only guess I can come up with. So anyways, we have to call off the recount at this point. We go to court, and you know, we hired the best, most well-known election law firm in California. Fred Wucher is a very well-known lawyer for decades in California. We thought we had this super strong case. I mean, you've got a right to a recount in California. They just clearly artificially made that impossible. Slam dunk, we're feeling great about it. And then in the intervening time, because of course litigation takes a while, this thing happens called the November 2020 election. And that kind of has an impact on the national, international discourse about whether elections have been done correctly. And when we get to our hearing in, I think it was August 2021, and this is right in the heat of cyber ninjas in Arizona and all this kind of crazy stuff going on. I mean, you could just feel the judge. I mean, it was all on Zoom, but you could just feel the judge almost like like that Homer Simpson backing into the foliage, GIF. I mean, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with this case and was as ready as any human being to dismiss it and get rid of it. So we lost that. We had an option to appeal, but frankly, we did not want to appeal and then potentially lose that appeal instead of set a statewide precedent that would foreclose anybody in the future taking these kind of cases forward. So that's where that ended for us, that portion of the journey. But I have to say, for me, as somebody who had a little bit of involvement in election administration earlier in my career when I worked for a congresswoman who had oversight over the EAC and HAVA, and then I kind of went to sleep on all this stuff for years, and then my eyes, I wake up to this sort of nightmare of the promised paper trail is this illusion. I got more and more involved and started doing research on VSAP. One of the amazing things that I found out was, so this is the ballot scanning machine with VSAP. They never told us it has a sorting function. I don't know if they knew. I mean, I would like to be generous and say they didn't know. But I only discovered it myself when I was contacted a couple years later by Professor Andrew Apple at Princeton, who was doing a paper that included our experience in LA County. And I went and looked closer at the machine, and I'm like, hell, it's got a 21 sort pockets functionality. Now, I'm not a computer scientist, but I did take a little in high school and college, and I know there are probably people out there that know all these sorting algorithms, bubble sort, whatever. You would have to run it through the machines a few times, but you could probably sort out 100,000 ballots from 2 million in a fairly reasonable amount of time. A lot faster than 16 human beings going through the boxes. So why the heck did they not tell us about that? I don't know. I really don't know, except that there were some more interesting discoveries as time went by, like looking into the background of Smartmatic and kind of wondering, why the heck would anybody hire this company to do your election machine for the largest county in America? I mean, it just seems crazy. Our registrar recorder, Dean Logan, he got the job, I think, in 2008, and right away he started this VSAP planning process, which incidentally, when they interviewed some voters at the very beginning, they were all saying, okay, just as long as it has a paper trail that you can do a recount. But this was his baby from the very beginning. And he's got a lot of background in election administration. Just coincidentally, my cousin, who was total coincidence, my cousin was secretary, who passed away earlier this year. My second cousin was Secretary of State of Washington State from 1980 to 2000. And he gave Dean Logan his first job as a young election administrator. And he ran into a lot of controversy when he became the county clerk of Kings County, which is Seattle. There was a 2004 gubernatorial election where they did a recount and the Republican was winning. And then when they did the recount, they found some extra ballots in boxes that hadn't been counted. And what do you know, the Democrat wins. So I'm not saying one way or the other on that, but there were a lot of questions about him at that point. And then he comes down to LA County and he starts this process. And he hires this company called Smartmatic. Smartmatic had no background in doing voting systems until its 3 Venezuelan co-founders were, in fact, hired by Hugo Chavez to do the machines for the 2004 recall election that Hugo Chavez won. And the U.S. Embassy after that said, Smartmatic is a riddle. The company came out of nowhere to snatch a multi-million-dollar contract in an electoral process that ultimately reaffirmed Chavez's mandate and all but destroyed his political opposition. The perspective we have here after several discussions with Smartmatic is that the company is de facto Venezuelan and operated by Venezuelans. The identity of Smartmatic's true owners remains a mystery. Then Smartmatic took that money and they bought Sequoia, which was a major manufacturer and had 17 state systems and DC. And Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney right away raised alarm bells, triggered a CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment, in the US investigation, and right away Smartmatic said, okay, we're going to divest of Sequoia to get rid of this investigation. So they got out of the US for a long time. They came back in LA County, and then this year, the president and co-founder gets indicted for bribing the top elections official in the Philippines during the same period of time that they were brought into LA County, $1 million bribe to do their voting systems. And just a few days ago, he was bribed, this is him, Roger Piñate, he was accused by the DOJ of bribing the top elections official in Venezuela. So he's now indicted for bribing the top elections official in 2 separate countries. You connect the dots. That's about all I have time for. Thank you.